Hello, so good to have you here. If you enjoy our narratives, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It is a simple gesture that helps us continue bringing new adventures to you. Julian Ashford stood by the expansive bay window of his study, a crystal tumbler of aged amber whiskey in his hand, looking out over the vast, rugged terrain of the Arizona Territory. The year was 1888, and the setting sun painted the sky in violent hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows over an empire built on steel, steam, and shrewd investment. Inside, the mansion was a testament to immense wealth, a sanctuary of civilization amidst the wild frontier. Heavy velvet drapes, imported mahogany furniture, and gas chandeliers that shimmered like captured stars adorned the room. Julian was a man who possessed everything a person could desire: a fortune derived from the booming railroad industry, vast tracts of land rich with potential gold veins, and a reputation as one of the finest surgeons to have ever graduated from the prestigious halls of the East Coast universities. Yet silence was his constant companion. He had retreated to this fortress of luxury not to conquer the West, but to hide from the ghosts of a past that money could not silence. He had lost too much, loved too deeply, and the resulting void was something he filled with the cold comfort of gold bars and property deeds. He had sworn never to care again, for caring was the precursor to pain. The evening air was cooling rapidly, and a restlessness stirred within Julian that he could not suppress with fine spirits or the perusal of his financial ledgers. He decided to ride the perimeter of his estate, a routine that usually calmed his nerves. Saddling his thoroughbred, a magnificent black stallion that cost more than most men earned in a lifetime, he trotted out towards the rocky outcrops that marked the edge of his property. The land here was treacherous, beautiful, and unforgiving. As he navigated a narrow canyon, the silence of the desert was broken not by the howl of a coyote, but by a soft, pained whimper. It was a sound so faint that a lesser man might have missed it, but Julian's instincts, honed by years of medical practice, were sharp. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel, and moved towards a cluster of mesquite bushes. There, lying amidst the dust and dry brush, was a woman. She was Apache, her attire traditional deerskin that blended with the earth, but stained dark with fresh blood. Even in her unconscious state, her features held a striking nobility. This was Elu. She had been separated from her group during a skirmish or an accident. Julian could not tell which, but her condition was critical. A deep gash ran along her side, and her breathing was shallow, a mere flutter against the harsh reality of the desert. Julian froze. The sensible, cold businessman in him knew the complications of this situation. The racial tensions in the territory were a powder keg, and harboring an Apache woman could invite scorn, if not outright hostility, from the local townsfolk and his wealthy peers. But the doctor in him, the man who had sworn an oath to preserve life, silenced the businessman. More than that, a strange jolt of recognition, not of her face but of her vulnerability, pierced the armor he had built around his heart. He could not leave her. With a gentleness that belied his imposing stature, Julian lifted Elu into his arms. She was light, yet her presence felt heavy with significance. He maneuvered her onto his horse, mounting behind her to support her limp frame against his chest. The ride back to the mansion was slow and deliberate. He felt the heat of her skin through her buckskin dress, a stark contrast to the chill settling in his own soul. Every breath she took was a victory, and oddly Julian found himself praying, something he hadn't done in years, that she would survive the journey. Upon arriving at the estate, the staff, well-trained and discreet, expressed shock, but obeyed his curt commands immediately. "Prepare the guest suite in the east wing," he ordered, his voice brokering no argument. "Bring hot water, clean linens, and my surgical kit. Now." He carried her through the grand foyer, beneath the glittering chandelier that seemed to mock the raw, bloody reality of life and death he held in his arms. He laid her upon a bed, covered in imported silk sheets, the luxury of the material jarring against the ruggedness of her life. Julian stripped off his expensive coat, rolled up his sleeves, and went to work. For the next several hours, he was not the railroad tycoon or the wealthy recluse. He was Dr. Ashford. He cleaned the wound, stitched the torn flesh with precision, and applied salves imported from Europe. Throughout the procedure, Elu remained unconscious, but at one point, her hand twitched and grasped his wrist. Her fingers were rough, calloused from life on the plains, touching his smooth, manicured skin. The contact sent a shockwave through him. It was a touch of desperate reliance, a silent plea for life. Julian paused, staring at her hand on his arm. He felt a tightening in his chest, a crack in the fortress. He feared this sudden, overwhelming urge to protect, to nurture, to care. It was dangerous. It was terrifying. But as he looked at her peaceful face, finally resting after the ordeal, he knew he was already too late to turn back. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of the east wing, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden light. Elu awoke to a softness she had never known. She was not lying on the hard earth or a pallet of furs, but on a cloud of white fabric. Her eyes fluttered open, taking in the alien surroundings, the floral wallpaper, the mahogany wardrobe, the silver pitcher on the bedside table. Panic surged briefly, instinctual and sharp, but it was quelled by the dull throb in her side and the weakness in her limbs. She tried to sit up, gasping as pain radiated from her wound. "Easy," a deep, resonant voice commanded from the corner of the room. Elu turned her head to see a man sitting in a leather armchair, a book resting on his knee. It was Julian. He looked tired, shadows beneath his eyes suggesting he had held a vigil through the night. "You are safe," Julian said, rising and approaching the bed with a glass of water. "I am Julian Ashford. You were injured near the canyon. I brought you here." He spoke clearly, hoping she understood. Elu studied him. She knew of the white men who encroached on their lands, usually with greed in their eyes and weapons in their hands, but this man had no weapon drawn. His hands, though large and strong, held the glass with care. She accepted the water, drinking thirstily, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "I am Elu," she whispered, her voice raspy. "My brother, Ki, he will be looking for me." Julian nodded solemnly. "When you are strong enough, we will find him. But for now, you must rest. Your wound was deep." Over the next few days, the mansion became a world of its own. The boundaries between their cultures began to blur within the walls of the estate. Julian found himself spending less time reviewing stock reports and more time in the East Wing. He brought her food, rich broths, fresh bread, fruits that had to be shipped in on ice. He watched as she regained her strength, fascinated by her resilience. Elu, in turn, observed him. She saw the sadness that lingered behind his professional demeanor. She saw the wealth that surrounded him, the gold and the crystal, and realized it brought him no joy. One afternoon, as he changed her bandages, his fingers brushing against her warm skin, the air in the room grew thick with unspoken emotion. "You have much," Elu said softly, looking around the opulent room, "but your spirit is quiet. It mourns." Julian froze, his hand hovering over her side. "I have everything a man could want, Elu," he replied defensively, though his voice lacked conviction. "Everything except peace," she countered gently. She reached out and touched his hand again, the same touch that had startled him that first night. This time he didn't pull away. The warmth of her palm against his skin was more valuable than any gold nugget in his mines. It awakened a longing he had buried, a longing to be known, to be seen, not for his money, but for the man beneath. However, the outside world would not stay at bay forever. Samuel Harrington, a rival land baron and banker with a reputation for ruthlessness, paid a visit to the Ashford estate. Harrington was a man driven by an insatiable hunger for more land, more power, more control. He had his eyes on the territory bordering Julian's, land that traditionally belonged to Elu's people, believing it sat atop a massive copper deposit. He arrived in a carriage, dusting off his suit as he entered Julian's study unannounced. "Julian, my boy," Harrington boomed, his eyes scanning the room with predatory calculation. "I hear rumors that you are harboring a savage in your home. A wounded bird from the tribe that occupies the land I intend to develop." Julian stiffened, placing his whiskey glass down with a sharp clink. "I am caring for a patient, Samuel. That is all you need to know, and she is a guest in my home." Harrington chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "A guest? Be careful, Julian. Sentiments like that can cost a man his standing and his investments. If that tribe refuses to move, I will have to use force. If you are seen aiding them, well, the railroad board might reconsider your chairmanship." The threat was veiled but clear. Harrington was threatening Julian's legacy, the very empire he had built to shield himself from the world. But as Julian looked at the greedy man before him, he realized something profound. The empire meant nothing if he lost his humanity. He thought of Elu upstairs, her quiet strength, her healing touch. "Get out of my house, Samuel," Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. "And if you touch that land, you will find that my fortune is not just for show. I will bury you in legal fees and buy the bank that holds your notes before you can lift a shovel." Harrington's smile vanished. He glared at Julian, tipped his hat mockingly and left. But Julian knew this was just the beginning. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for. I'd love to know where you are watching this story from. Please tell me in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The confrontation with Harrington ignited a fire in Julian that he hadn't felt since the early days of building his railroad. He knew Harrington would not back down easily. Men like him were driven by a greed that consumed everything in its path. Julian immediately sent telegrams to his lawyers in New York and San Francisco, mobilizing his vast financial resources to place protective injunctions on the land surrounding his estate and the adjacent territories inhabited by Elu's tribe. He was prepared to spend a fortune, to liquidate assets if necessary, to create a buffer zone that Harrington could not cross. Meanwhile, Elu's recovery was progressing remarkably. She was now able to walk around the gardens of the estate, often accompanied by Julian. The contrast was striking. The woman of the earth walking amidst the manicured roses and marble statues, with the industrial tycoon by her side. During these walks they spoke of their worlds. Elu told him of the spirits of the land, of the importance of community and balance. Julian spoke of engines, of steel connecting oceans, of the weight of expectation. "You build paths for others to travel," Elu noted one evening as they watched the sunset from the veranda. "But you have no path for yourself." Julian looked at her, the dying light illuminating her high cheekbones and deep, knowing eyes. "I think I lost my map a long time ago," he confessed. "Until now." The confession hung in the air. He turned to her, bridging the small distance between them. The fear was still there, the fear of loss, of pain, but the desire to be near her was stronger. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. Her skin was warm, alive. Elu did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. When he kissed her, it was tentative at first, a question asked in silence, but as her lips met his, softer than the silk she slept on, the dam broke. It was a kiss of desperate need, of two lonely souls finding harbor in one another. In her arms, Julian found the gold he had been missing. He realized that his wealth was cold and dead, but this connection, was vibrant and alive. Their moment of peace was shattered the next day when Ki, Elu's brother, arrived at the estate gates with a small party of warriors. They were wary, their hands near their weapons, having heard whispers that Elu was being held by the rich white man. Julian rode out to meet them, unarmed, with Elu riding beside him on a mare he had gifted her. The tension was palpable. Ki looked from his sister to Julian, suspicion etched in his face. Elu spoke rapidly in her native tongue, gesturing to Julian, to her healed side, and then to the land around them. She explained how Julian had saved her, how he was protecting their land from Harrington. Ki's expression softened slowly. He looked at Julian with a new measure of respect. "My sister says you are a healer," Ki said in broken English. "And a man of honor." Julian nodded, meeting the warrior's gaze. "I care for her," Julian stated simply, the truth of it ringing clear in the desert air. "And I will not let Harrington take your home." Just then, a cloud of dust on the horizon signaled the approach of Harrington and a corrupt local sheriff he had bought. They rode up to the gates, demanding Elu be turned over as a hostile and that the tribe vacate the land immediately for mineral survey. Harrington looked smug, believing the law or his version of it was on his side. Julian didn't flinch. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag, the telegraph responses he had received that morning. "Sheriff," Julian called out, his voice projecting with the authority of a man who owned half the state, "if you step 1 foot on this property or the land adjacent to it, you will be violating a federal preservation order signed by a judge in Washington this very morning. I have purchased the mineral rights to all this land, and I have designated it a private reserve." He threw the papers at Harrington's feet. "Furthermore, Samuel, my associates have just acquired the majority stake in your bank. If you wish to remain solvent, I suggest you turn your horse around and never return." Harrington turned pale as he read the documents. The realization that Julian had outmaneuvered him, not with guns but with the sheer crushing weight of superior capital and influence, drained the arrogance right out of him. The sheriff, realizing his paycheck was suddenly very uncertain, tipped his hat to Julian and backed away. Harrington, defeated and humiliated, glared one last time before spurring his horse and fleeing. A cheer did not erupt. Instead, a profound silence of relief settled over the group. Ki looked at Julian and nodded, a gesture of immense significance. It was an acceptance, a peace treaty between two men from different worlds. In the months that followed, the Ashford estate changed. It was no longer a fortress of solitude. It became a bridge. Julian used his influence to ensure the permanent protection of the Apache lands, establishing a trust that guaranteed their sovereignty against future encroachers. He continued his medical practice, but now he treated anyone who came to his gates regardless of their race or ability to pay. The cold, empty halls of his mansion were filled with life. Elu chose to stay with him, though they spent their summers in the high country with her people, ensuring their children, for there were children eventually, knew both the world of the railroad and the world of the spirits. The final scene of our story finds Julian and Elu standing on the same balcony where he once drank alone. The sun is setting, casting the same violent orange and purple hues, but now Julian sees only beauty. He holds Elu's hand, her fingers interlaced with his. He is still a man of immense fortune, his business is thriving, his gold vaults full. But as he looks at the woman beside him, and the land stretching out peacefully before them, he knows the truth. He had feared that her touch would awaken the pain of the past. Instead, it had awakened his future. The wounded Apache woman had healed the doctor, and in the heart of the Wild West, amidst the dust and the struggle, they had found a treasure that no bank could hold and no thief could steal. A love that was truly timeless. True wealth is not found in gold bars or vast estates, but in the courage to open one's heart to love and compassion, even when we are afraid. When we use our power and resources to protect and uplift others, we discover a richness of spirit that money can never buy. Hello everyone, ready for another story? If you want to be part of our community of story lovers, leave your like and subscribe to the channel.